Fat Girl was buried under rocks as living grave. Mountain Man moved every stone and said, "Rise," like Phoenix. The sun blazed mercilessly over the stony valley outside Stonehaven. Heat shimmered above jagged rocks, and yet the most chilling sight lay beneath them, a living grave. Seraphina Sarah Tombstone, 38 years old and heavy-set with a body mocked all her life, had been condemned by the very family that once promised her shelter. The Grimwalds called her a curse, a bringer of misfortune, and so, in a ritual of cruelty dressed as purification, they buried her beneath tons of stones, leaving only her face exposed to the blistering sky. "Pile it higher!" roared Mordecai Grimwald, patriarch of the clan, sweat streaking down his hollow cheeks. "This fat beast has brought nothing but ruin. She will lie as a sacrifice, her body crushed beneath rock until her soul is cleansed." The laborers obeyed, stacking boulder upon boulder across her chest and limbs. Sarah felt her ribs compress, her breath shallow, every stone another weight, driving her closer to death. "Please, just kill me quickly," she begged through cracked lips, dust caking her throat. "Don't make me die like this." But Mordecai only sneered, "You'll remain here until the earth swallows you whole. Perhaps then the spirits will forgive us." For 3 days and nights she lay trapped, rain and sun alike beating down on her, unable to move, her skin blistering, her voice fading into a rasp. She was no longer a woman to the Grimwalds, just a living monument to their hatred. And then, on the dawn of the 4th day, the mountains themselves seemed to answer her silent prayer. A roar thundered across the valley, shaking the stones. "Who dares bury a living soul?" A colossal figure descended from the cliffs, broad as the boulders themselves, his silver hair gleaming in the sun. Atlas Stonelifter had come. All her life, Seraphina Tombstone had been told she was too much, too heavy, too loud when she laughed, too odd to ever belong. After her parents died of fever, she was placed in the custody of the Grimwalds, a family with deep roots in Stonehaven, but darker roots in cruelty. To them, she was not a daughter, but a debt to be borne, a mouth too large for the table, a body too large for their pride. By the time she reached 38, Sarah had grown into a woman of immense size, over 400 pounds, with a round face that once shone with kindness, but had long since been dulled by ridicule. She knew every cruel whisper, every pointed finger, every child's taunt that echoed through town whenever she passed. And she had learned to bow her head, to shrink as best she could, though her body refused to be hidden. The Grimwalds were masters of twisting misfortune into blame. If a cow went barren, it was Sarah's fault. If storms washed out the crops, it was her curse. When Mordecai's eldest son broke his leg, he swore it was Sarah's shadow that brought the bone down. Eventually, they stopped treating her as family at all and began to treat her as a scapegoat. That summer, when a drought withered the fields, Mordecai declared that the only way to cleanse their household was through sacrifice. And so they dragged her to the valley, forced her to lie upon the gravel, and began to heap stones upon her. At first she screamed, then pleaded, then prayed. But when the last boulder was placed and only her head remained free, silence became her only companion. The people of Stonehaven knew of it. Some looked away in fear of the Grimwald's wrath. Others told themselves she must have deserved it. No one lifted a hand. But Atlas Stonelifter was not no one. High above on Granite Peak, he had lived in solitude for decades. Stories about him had passed through taverns like wildfire, a man taller than trees, strong enough to wrestle boulders, feared as much as he was revered. They said he once lifted a collapsed mine shaft by himself, pulling trapped men to safety. They said he could carry a millstone on each shoulder as if it were kindling. Yet they also said he was cursed, that wherever he lingered, mountains shifted and lives were lost. The truth was simpler and sadder. Years ago, Atlas had been a husband and a father. When a rock slide buried his family alive, he alone clawed through the rubble, moving stone after stone until his hands bled and his bones cracked. But he had been too late. From that day forward, he bore his grief in silence, vowing that no innocent soul should ever be buried under the earth again. When Sarah's faint cries carried up through the canyons, Atlas first thought it a trick of memory, an echo of his wife's last voice. But the sound did not fade. It grew weaker, desperate, human. Following the voice, he descended the cliffs with steps that shook the ground. Now, standing over the mound of stone where only Sarah's face protruded, Atlas felt his heart thunder like the mountains themselves. Her eyes fluttered open at his shadow. "You're real," she whispered. "I am," he rumbled, his voice deep as shifting granite, "and you will not die here." Atlas's hands, broad as wagon wheels, descended upon the first stone. He gripped it, veins bulging, and heaved. The boulder rolled away with a crash that sent dust into the sky. Another followed, and another, his rhythm steady as a heartbeat. Sarah felt the weight on her chest lighten bit by bit, but fear gnawed at her. Don't waste your strength. I'm too heavy. I'll drag you down like I dragged them." Atlas paused, his silver hair damp with sweat, and looked at her with eyes the color of iron. "Mountains are heavy too, but I was born to move them. You are not a burden. You are a soul." For hours he worked without pause. Stones that would take 6 men to budge yielded in his grip like pebbles. The sun climbed high, then sank toward the horizon. At last, when the final boulder was cast aside, Atlas crouched low and slid his arms beneath her broken, numb body. Her flesh trembled, purpled with bruises, and her limbs refused to respond. Tears burned down her dusty cheeks as he lifted her as though she weighed nothing. Against his chest, she could hear the steady boom of his heart, strong and unyielding. "I can't feel my legs," she whispered, voice breaking. "You will," Atlas said. "The river carved the canyon, didn't it? Slowly, patiently, you will carve your way back too." He carried her through the valley as night descended, past coyotes and shadowed cliffs. Sarah tried to keep her eyes open, afraid that if she closed them, she would never wake again. Atlas noticed, and his voice rumbled like a lullaby. "Rest. You are safe now. My back will not falter." Hours later, they reached his dwelling, a cavern carved into the mountainside, but unlike any den of stone she had imagined. Crystals jutted from the walls, scattering torchlight into 1,000 colors. A hot spring bubbled gently in the center, steam curling like soft hands in the cool night. Atlas laid her carefully by the water's edge. "This place heals," he said. "It has mended the weary for longer than memory." He lowered her into the warm spring, supporting her head. The heat seeped through her body, dulling the ache, easing the pressure where stone had bruised her. She gasped, half in pain, half in wonder. "It feels like life," she murmured. "It is life," Atlas replied. He knelt beside her, hands resting on his knees. "You thought you were buried, but what is buried can rise. The earth only shapes what it cannot break. In the days that followed, Atlas tended her as though she were sacred. He crushed herbs between stones, fed her broth from a wooden ladle, and when she wept in the night, remembering Mordecai's voice calling her a monster, he sat beside her until the tears stilled. One morning, when dawn painted the cave in amber, Atlas handed her a carved staff. "Hold this. Stand if you can." Sarah trembled, gripping the smooth wood. Her legs, weak and trembling, wobbled beneath her. She collapsed into his arms, sobbing, "I can't." Atlas steadied her, his hand gentle against her back. "You stood against death itself. This is smaller than that. Try again." She looked up at him, at the scars that lined his arms, at the sorrow carved into his face. And she tried again. One step, then another, each one a battle. When her body screamed, she clenched her jaw and moved. Atlas's lips curved, just slightly. There, the phoenix is learning her wings. For the first time since the stones had closed over her, Sarah smiled, weak, weary, but real. Together, they began the climb out of despair, step by step, stone by stone. Life within Atlas's mountain dwelling unfolded slowly, like spring thawing after a long winter. The cavern, vast and shimmering with crystals, was not only a shelter, but a cathedral carved by time itself. Here silence reigned, broken only by the crackle of the fire or the drip of water echoing through stone halls. Atlas had lived alone for decades, his hands too large for delicate things, his soul too scarred for companionship. Yet now, with Sarah under his roof, the space felt transformed. Her presence softened the hard edges of stone as though the mountain itself breathed warmer. Each morning, he prepared a fire of cedar logs that filled the chamber with sweet smoke. He would coax Sarah from her bedding of furs and carry her to the spring, where the healing waters continued to soothe her battered body. She would close her eyes and sigh, steam curling around her cheeks. "It feels as though the water knows my pain," she whispered once. Atlas dipped his calloused hand into the spring and let droplets fall upon her shoulder. "Stone remembers," he said. "Water remembers too. They hold the weight of centuries. They understand what you carry." Outside the cavern, Atlas had begun shaping a cabin from timber hauled down the slope. "The cave protects," he explained, "but you need light, sky, air, a place with a door you can open yourself." Sarah watched him labor, muscles flexing as he split logs with a single swing, his immense frame moving as if born to build. She felt a pang of awe mixed with something warmer she hardly dared name. And though she could not yet walk unaided, she refused to remain idle. She began sweeping the cavern floor with a bundle of pine branches, arranging stones in neat circles, grinding herbs for poultices. When Atlas returned from hauling wood, he found the cavern tidier, a pot of broth simmering on the fire. "You've worked too much," he rumbled, half in disapproval, half in admiration. She met his gaze, eyes steady. "So have you." The days unfolded with a rhythm neither had expected. Atlas showed her how to use a knife to peel bark for kindling, how to stack logs so air would feed the flame, how to twist grass into rope. His hands, enormous and clumsy for delicate work, became surprisingly gentle as he guided hers. "Let the blade glide," he instructed softly, his hand over hers. The warmth of his palm, the steadiness of his strength, made her heart stutter. At night, they sat by the fire. Atlas would carve small figurines from stone, birds, wolves, once even a phoenix, and place them beside her bed. "For you?" he said simply. Sarah held one figurine, tracing its wings. "You call me Phoenix," But I don't feel like one. I feel broken." Atlas looked into the flames. "Broken stone can be mended with fire. Broken hearts, too. Phoenixes burn before they rise. You are still in the burning." Her eyes glistened. "And you?" "I burned long ago," he admitted, voice low. "Lost my wife to fever, lost my child to winter. I buried them beneath stone. After that, I buried myself too." He paused, then turned to her. "Until the day I heard you cry beneath the rocks." Silence fell between them, deep and reverent. For the first time in years, Sarah reached out, not for balance, not for support, but for him. Her fingers brushed his hand. He did not move away. Weeks turned into months. Her strength returned, first slowly, then with surprising vigor. She could walk across the cabin with her staff, chop small bundles of wood, even climb to the ridge where the wind tangled her hair and she could see the world stretch wide. Atlas always stood nearby, a sentinel, but he let her try, let her fall and rise again. One evening, when the sky burned crimson and the cabin stood finished with smoke curling from its chimney, Atlas placed a wooden bowl before her, filled with roasted rabbit and wild herbs. He bowed his head before eating, then pushed the bowl toward her. "You first," he said. Sarah smiled through tears. "You always let me eat first." "Why?" His great shoulders lifted in a half shrug. "Because for too long you were starved. I want you to know you will never be last again." Her throat tightened. She reached across the table and placed her hand on his massive wrist. "You've given me more than food, Atlas. You've given me myself." He lowered his eyes, but she saw the faintest smile on his lips. In the glow of firelight, with stone walls gleaming around them, the two outcasts, one who had been buried under rocks, the other who had buried his heart in stone, found something neither had dared dream of: home. The cabin on Granite Peak became a sanctuary, but even sanctuaries cannot keep out whispers carried on the wind. Word of Sarah's survival spread through the valley. Some spoke of it as a miracle, others as a curse. And to the Grimwald family, the ones who had buried her alive, it was an intolerable shame. "They say she walks again," hissed Ruth Grimwald, Mordecai's eldest daughter, her lips tight with fury. "She should have been nothing but bones under stone. Now the town calls her the Phoenix. Do you know what that makes us? Executioners who failed." Mordecai slammed his fist on the table. "Then we will finish what we began. That mountain beast cannot keep her from us forever." While hatred brewed in the Grimwald household, shadows also stirred within Atlas's heart. One evening, as he sat beside the fire carving yet another figurine, Sarah noticed his silence stretched too long. "You're holding something back," she said gently. Atlas's chisel stilled. His face, weathered and stern, softened with reluctance. "The army once called me deserter. They said I abandoned my post in the war. They never knew. I had left to bury my wife and son when fever took them. By the time I returned, my regiment was gone. The label stuck. I carried it like chains." Sarah's eyes widened. "You lived with that? Alone all these years?" He nodded, his massive hands curling around the half-carved stone. "That is why I never went down to the towns again. To them, I am not Atlas Stonelifter, but a coward." She reached across the fire, touching his scarred hand. "To me, you are the man who moved mountains to save me. Let them call you coward. I know the truth." Her words eased something in him, but he feared what her loyalty might cost. And soon enough, the cost came knocking. One storm-laden morning, hoofbeats thundered up the slope. Atlas stepped outside, jaw clenched. A group of men armed with rifles advanced, led by Mordecai Grimwald himself. "There she is!" Mordecai shouted when Sarah limped into view behind Atlas, his face twisted in hatred. "The cursed woman who brings ruin! Hand her over, Stonelifter, or we'll bury you with her this time." Atlas's voice rumbled like distant thunder. "She is no curse. She is life returned. You will not lay another stone upon her." Mordecai sneered. "She's bewitched you, giant. Don't you see? She was meant for the grave. The land rejects her." Before Atlas could answer, Sarah stepped forward, her staff digging into the earth. Her voice, though trembling, carried with surprising strength. "No, Mordecai, it is you the land rejects. You tried to erase me because you feared me. You feared what I reminded you of, your cruelty, your emptiness. But I rose, and I will not bow to you again." The men shifted uneasily, some lowering their rifles. For the first time, they saw not a broken woman, but one who stood defiantly despite everything done to her. Mordecai snarled, "You'll regret defying me, all of you!" He turned his horse sharply, the others following, though with far less certainty than before. When silence returned, Sarah collapsed onto the bench outside the cabin, her breath ragged. Atlas knelt beside her, pride mingling with worry. "You spoke like a phoenix," he said softly. "I felt, for the first time, that I wasn't afraid of the stones any more," she whispered, "not with you beside me." But as the storm rolled across the mountain that night, Atlas knew Mordecai would return, stronger, more desperate, and deep inside, another fear gnawed at him, the whispers of deserter, coward. Would those old accusations resurface, binding not only him but the woman he loved? In the glow of the fire, Sarah reached for his hand. "Whatever stones they throw, Atlas, we'll move them together." He clasped her fingers gently, a vow unspoken, knowing the greatest trial still lay ahead. The storm that had threatened finally broke in the dead of night. Rain lashed the cabin roof, thunder cracked the sky, and with it came the pounding of hooves and the glint of torches. Mordecai Grimwald had returned, this time with nearly a dozen men at his back. Atlas rose from his chair, shoulders tense, eyes narrowing as the glow of fire crept up the slope. "They've come for you," he murmured. Sarah stood, leaning on her staff, fear sparking in her chest. But behind it burned something else. "No," she said firmly, "they've come for us." The cabin door rattled under a heavy fist. "Stonelifter!" Mordecai roared. "Give us the cursed sow, or we'll burn you both alive." Atlas unbarred the door and stepped out, rain sheeting across his massive frame. "You'll not touch her," he growled. Mordecai sneered from horseback. "You think you can hold off 10 rifles, mountain beast? We'll bury you under the same stones you stole from us." Before Atlas could answer, Sarah appeared at his side, her soaked dress clinging to her frame, her staff planted firmly in the mud. Her voice cut through the storm. "You already buried me once, Mordecai, and I rose. Do you not see? You cannot kill what has been reborn." The men shifted uneasily. Some looked at her with something close to awe. Rain glistened on her hair, her eyes fierce, her body trembling but unyielding. She no longer looked like prey. Mordecai spat. "Witchcraft and lies. She's nothing but a beast in woman's skin." He raised his pistol. Atlas stepped forward, placing himself between the muzzle and Sarah. "Then face me. If you must bury someone tonight, let it be the Stonelifter." The gunshot cracked, deafening. The bullet struck Atlas's shoulder, spinning him slightly, but he did not fall. With a roar like the mountain itself, he seized a boulder from the ground and hurled it at Mordecai's horse. The beast reared, throwing the patriarch into the mud. Chaos erupted. Some of the men fired wildly, others fled into the storm, their courage drowned by thunder and the sight of the giant who would not fall. Sarah limped forward, staff raised, standing over Mordecai as he scrambled in the muck. "You called me cursed," she said, her voice trembling with fury. "But the curse is your cruelty, and tonight it ends." She struck his pistol from his hand with her staff. The weapon clattered uselessly into the mud. Mordecai froze, staring up at the woman he once buried, now towering over him with the fire of a phoenix in her eyes. "Leave this mountain," Atlas thundered, clutching his bleeding shoulder. "If you return, the stones themselves will rise against you." Broken and humiliated, Mordecai staggered to his feet and fled into the storm. His men, leaderless, scattered. The valley fell silent, but for rain and thunder's fading growl. Sarah turned to Atlas, who sagged against the doorframe, blood mingling with rainwater. She caught his massive hand, her eyes fierce and wet. "You didn't stand alone tonight, neither did I. We did this together." And in that storm-lit moment, they both knew the grave had become a cradle, and love had risen stronger than stone. When dawn broke, the mountain lay hushed beneath a veil of mist. Rain had washed away the blood and mud, leaving only the cabin standing firm against the storm. Inside, the fire burned steady, its warmth wrapping around two weary souls. Atlas sat by the hearth, his shoulder bound with linen. His strength was not diminished, though the night had carved new lines of pain across his face. Beside him, Sarah moved quietly, laying another log onto the flames. She was no longer the woman who once lay buried beneath stone. She stood straighter, eyes clearer, her steps guided not by fear, but by resolve. The cabin glowed with life, the scent of stew simmering, the crackle of fire, the soft murmur of wind outside. For the first time, Sarah felt the space not as a refuge borrowed, but as a home earned. Atlas's voice broke the silence deep and steady. "You are safe here." Her throat tightened. She turned toward him, eyes brimming with tears. "Safe and free?" He nodded, gaze steady on hers. "It's your home now, if you'll have it." Her lips trembled into a smile and tears spilled down her cheeks. She lowered herself beside him, leaning into the warmth of his great arm. Outside, the storm clouds lifted, revealing a sky streaked with light. Yet beyond the mountains, whispers of grim-walled anger still lingered. The world had not forgotten. Perhaps it never would. But inside the cabin, with stone walls guarding and fire burning, two broken souls sat together, unafraid. And as the flames flickered across their faces, the question lingered in the air. Would love strong enough to lift every stone be strong enough to stand against the world beyond these peaks? Every time I share a story like this, I'm reminded that even in the darkest valleys, there are voices that refuse to be buried, voices that rise again like Sarah's. Perhaps you too have faced stones of shame, judgment, or cruelty. Maybe you're still carrying them. But remember, the heaviest rocks can be lifted when love stands beside you. Tell me, friend, where are you listening from tonight? I'd love to know. And if you still believe that love can move mountains, then stay close. The next story I tell might just be meant for you.